It's time to build the shocks. You have two different shocks, two long ones in the rear, two short ones in the front. That goes along with two long springs in the rear and two short springs in the front. Just about all the other components are the same, so they get put together the same way. The only other difference is the ball ends at the tops of the shocks get different ball ends. The front and the rear get different ball ends. So I'm going to run through one and show how they go together, and then build the rest off camera.
Team Baxter.
Now first we have this cartridge. So you have 4 cartridges here. This cartridge takes washers, spacer, washer, and then a cap. First, before I start putting the washers on, I'm going to go ahead and put this silicone ring around the cartridge at the bottom. Then I'm going to put a layer of grease into this cartridge, like to squirt all the way around. One good coat. Then I take my first O-ring and push down into that. If I get that O-ring kind of seated in there, push it on down. I go in with another layer of grease. I normally use green slime. I happen to be out of green slime. This grease, marine grease, is just as heavy, so I'm going to use that in this instance. But anyway, I use it pretty heavy. Go in there and cover that O-ring up. And I'll drop a spacer in there. After that spacer, I'm going to go in with another coat of grease right around. Top that with another O-ring. Push that on down in there. Go in there with more grease on top of that O-ring again, just to top it off. Now that top layer of grease doesn't need to be so thick, because once I pop this cap on here, it just goes on with a snap. If you put too much grease in there, it will come right out of the top of this cartridge. So that's the main cartridge built. I'm going to go ahead and put that down. I'm building the front shock right now, so I'm grabbing the shorter shaft. At the top of this shaft, I'm going to drop one washer, one piston, another washer, and on top of that goes one lock nut. Let's get it on there. Right, keeps trying to cross thread on me. Spin that on there. These shafts have a flat spot on them, so grab the shaft by the flat spot and use my cross wrench to tighten her on down. Make sure you use the right side to make the job a little bit easier. And you just want to tighten that enough to firm it up. Not too tight. You can see the top of the shaft just starting to show at the top of this. So that's one shaft done. I'm going to go ahead and push this through the cartridge and wipe off the extra grease here. Keep a paper towel handy off to the side. And now I get a little bump stop. Slides on there, flat side down. Go ahead and push that up against the back for now. And I'm going to go ahead and thread on my rod end. So now I've got the cartridge installed on this shaft, and it's trapped by the rod end and the piston on the other side. Go ahead and slide this into the short body since I'm building the short front shock. Slide that in real carefully and tighten it down. Make sure you don't cross thread. And I want to get that tight. I want this tight enough so that it doesn't leak, but not tight enough so that it crosses the threads. That being that this cartridge only has plastic threads, we don't want to over tighten it. So get it on there real snug but not loose, and then you have your shock action and you're ready to fill her up. I use a number 10 wrench that fits exactly over the edge. Tighten it just enough by hand. I'm actually turning the shock assembly and not the wrench until it doesn't turn anymore. Put that down. Now for the front shocks, I'm actually using the 30 weight axial oil that was provided. My own choice to use 20 weight oil in the rear. Axial provides 10 weight oil for the rear, but numerous sources have told me that it is too light and the shocks are too soft, so I'm going to go ahead and try to counter that a little bit right now with my own 20 weight oil for the rear. But anyway, since I'm building the front, I'm going to go ahead and very carefully, because this top came off on me last time, I'm going to very carefully fill this halfway with oil. Pump the piston up and down a couple times. Try to get that air out. Then I'm going to let it sit for a little bit so that all of those air bubbles can kind of come out. I'm going to go ahead and start building on the next shock while I'm waiting for this one to kind of let the air get out of there. So I've got most of the air out of here now, and I'm going to go ahead and top it off. A little bit too much, so I need to make sure my ring is on there before I put the top on. Get that down just a little bit past the upper lip. So before I put the top on, I like to compress the just about all the way, just so I have enough space to comfortably put the bladder on top. Then I'll put the bladder on top of that, push down just so it seats. Quickly wipe the extra off. You see my bladder is not seated correctly. It's allowing a little bit of air in. Position the bladder again and get that air pushed out of there. And if you push the bladder down on this particular shot well enough, kind of grabs and will create its own little seal. And not like stay permanently, but stay good enough. So once you got that, you go ahead and carefully slide your top on, push down while you're spinning, and hand tighten. You should be able to slowly pull your shaft back out. Give it a second. Pull it slow so that the oil has a chance to come through the piston. If it pulls back, then the oil is not gone all the way through the piston. Now, this is the way I like to set up my shocks. Shocks I found are extremely personal preference, so this works for me. It may not work for everyone. Anyway, I'm sliding my spring on here. Another personal preference, I like to keep the colored side down. That's a yellow spring for the fronts. Compress it just a little bit and slide the retainer clip over, making sure your little bump stop is above. Now you can see when you don't have the ring dialed in the way they want, the spring will be a little loose, so you gotta go ahead and roll that on down. Manual suggests to put this at 15 millimeters. So that's the shock built. Good compression. It's a little tight wound down as far as the manual says, but nice silky action. And I hear no air in there. So I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of them built and get them installed on the truck. So for whatever reason, the manual has me installing the front bumper before I install the front shocks. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll go ahead and get the front shocks installed here to the shock tower on both sides. After that, I get the rear shocks mounted, which get mounted into the lower link, into this recess here. I got the front and rear shocks in, and just as I was told, the rear shocks are super soft, very soft. Pretty silky, but still very soft nonetheless. I'm going to go ahead and run it in stock formation, but I can tell these are pretty soft even with my 20-weight oil. It's just buttery soft. So anyway, the shocks are in.